In the mind of every video gamer, there is an ideal game. Everyone may have a favorite game, or game that defines their interests and occupies every acre of their otherwise empty mind. But maybe, if there is a moment where they are not thinking about their favorite game, there is a moment where they are pondering what their perfect game is. A game that does not exist, yet has the characters, gameplay, environment, and the vibe that one so dreams of. A selfish desire, maybe something niche, but nonetheless, anyone who has played a video game envisions what their perfect game is. To me, the writer of this humble schmuck channel, my ideal game is many, multiple different ideas bouncing in my head of different genres and game types, yet one that has always stuck in my head the longest can be best described by describing to you, the audience, a particular moment in Jurassic Park. Late into the movie, the comic relief villain, Nedry, is attempting to deliver dinosaur embryos to the Isa Nublar docks for a big money payout. Only issue being the entire island has gone to shit with the escaped dinosaurs. And so he drives in the pissing rain through this narrow-ass dirt trail in a Jeep. He has no idea where he is going. He's lost, yet any moment outside of the truck would inevitably mean his death. He is reliant on the Jeep getting him out of the island, but at a critical point, he loses control and crashes the truck and has to use the winch to become unstuck. Leaving his vehicle, he is now exposed to threats, aka dinosaurs. It does not actually end well for him, but this vibe of traveling in a vehicle with some sort of destination goal in mind, foes from the outside are out to kill you, using the knowledge of both the environment and your driving skills to outwit them. Should any mistake occur, you are then forced to exit the vehicle and figure out what the fuck to do. For a good long while, I have wanted a game like that. Many games have one being able to get out of cars and fight an enemy of sorts, but often the vehicle is treated as disposable upon the first enemy encounter, nothing but transportation instead of a friend. To even broaden my scope, I would often say I just want a driving, not racing-based adventure game. Then, when I saw the trailer for Pacific Drive, upon first inspection, this was exactly the game I have always been looking for. Vehicle-based exploration and navigation on difficult environments on foot and behind the wheel, heavy reliance on your car keeping you alive instead of throwing it away when it doesn't suit you. A mysterious vibe with unknown threats all around. Yes, this was looking to be my game, and in many respects, it was. Or, well, it could have been. I could explain in simple words the negatives of why this game disappointed me, but to actually explain that, I must describe what made me enjoy it, as both the joy and the pain are in equal measure. The pain only exists because of the contrast of what is good, just like Dark Souls. The premise for Pacific Drive is but a simple one. The only background you get is a quick blurb about how where you are heading was a place called The Zone, where magical things started to happen before everything went to shit and the area was closed off. The said magical things that occurred there include appliances that do mysterious things, giving people visions, amongst other oddities, such as the entire area just becoming some unusual Mars-like foreign planet landscape. For what reason was the player heading there at all? I don't know, because the game demands it, I suppose. The player is voiceless, and only at some point later gets a placeholder name of Driver. But the overall plot that you, the player, are engaged with is simply that you want to leave the mysterious interdimensional zone that you got sucked into by being in a place you shouldn't have been. Or at least I think that's what your goal is. It's what I would want to do if I were suddenly trapped in a mysterious place, so I assumed that's what I was trying to do. As we will get to later, the plot is severely lacking. Fact of the matter is, once you are in the zone, the game takes little time to introduce you to your new ride, a nondescript American station wagon of certainly a 1980s vintage. A quintessential American car for a quintessentially absurd adventure. A key element of the perfect game I had in my head is adventure from a car, the automobile. Too many car games are based on repetition of a track or course or map, but here, in Pacific Drive, you adventure into a perpetual unknown with nothing but your trusty rusty wagon. Your vehicle is your friend, your companion, and as the game states it, bonded to you. When you are first introduced to the unnamed wagon, it is broken, missing wheels, and can barely move. But as time progresses and you gather upgrades from the many map locations, the small, humble rust bucket becomes a vehicle that would not be too far off from the cover of a pulp science fiction magazine. That particular style, pulp science fiction, is most certainly what vibe the game is going for. I have no idea what that genre truly includes, since I seldom read or watch movies or watch television, but I once saw the cover for one of those retro magazines and thought to myself, why yes, this is the aesthetic for Pacific Drive. Certainly, as you drive along in the game, you have plenty of time to observe its aesthetic and vibe, as you are never traveling fast. Most of the game, you pluck along at 50 miles per hour, trying to avoid any number of roadside anomalies that appear to be out to kill you. If it were any other typical survival game, you would jump out at this instant, abandoning the vehicle and going in guns blazing. But Pacific Drive is a game of avoidance more than combat. There are the odd enemies you can go Gordon Freeman on, but for the most part, Pacific Drive is an adventure game that actually values your skill in driving. Going around enemies, finding a way to avoid conflict, yet also knowing when to floor it when the environment becomes a bit too nasty. There is a fine balance one must carry between driving slowly and driving fast. Fast enough to run, slow enough to avoid. Adventure when driving mixed with skill. Hell yeah. If only I actually understood why any of this was actually happening. There is often a fiction trope of a scientist nerd who uses many big words that make no sense in order to describe how a piece of fantastical scientific equipment works. The doohickey goes into the flabberhoodzits, and that charges the neurolingers, which gives you enough power to enter the loopery dimension. Usually, this is used as a comic relief moment, but in Pacific Drive, that is just the dialogue, all of the time, but it's serious. That level of dialogue is present throughout the entire game, and it severely hampered my ability to actually comprehend what was going on. The game has 3 named characters: Dr. Oppie, Tobias, and Francis, none of which you actually ever see, but they all communicate to the player via radio what must be done to escape. Oppie is a hard-ass old woman who is very obviously keeping secrets from everyone. Tobias is a man from Boston and talks like it, and Francis is a wimpy scientist. I am often told that science fiction radio shows were popular in the first half of the 20th century, and whether intentionally or unintentionally, I will say that the entire plot of Pacific Drive is rekindling that type of radio show, because it really does feel like you are playing a game while people reenact some radio drama in the background, detached from what you are actually doing. The player, or driver, for the most part is just doing the same thing each loop, prepping the car, driving the car into the zone, and then returning from the zone to repeat the cycle. During this, at key moments, the radio show of a story tells you something somewhat interesting, where at the end they will tell you to go to some spot on the map, and upon traveling to this spot, they will describe, using the vague scientist terminology I just lamented about, to tell the player exactly why flipping these switches or driving past these gates is doing something incredible. For the most part, the dialogue and so-called story of this game is just there to let you know that there are people around and to give a voice to the environment. And what an environment it is. I am very picky when it comes to the games I play. In most cases, I will play the worst shit you have ever seen just because I enjoy the vibe. My ideal game I just described at the top of this essay is 75% vibe-based and 25% plot-based. Fortunately, where Pacific Drive has maybe 2% of the plot and storytelling I want, it has about 60% of the vibe I wanted. And goddamn, it was enough for me to suffer through it all the way to the end. There are many aspects to a vibe. One part music, multi-part color, and second part's the objects and people that make up for it. While Pacific Drive lacks any people, or really animals at all, everything I just stated comes together beautifully in this game. The way the sun will shine along twisted roads, the way the rain patters on the roof of the home base garage, or the darkness of the night that only the headlights of the wagon can pierce. Wonderful! I've only visited the Pacific Northwest a few times so far in my life, and I can say this definitely does capture the vibe and mood of just driving along an empty road with nothing but you and miles of God's green earth around you. Visually, the presentation of Pacific Drive is immaculate, pristine, and everything I would have wanted. My favorite moment in this game is not even a set piece or particular speedy escape. It was just when I pulled up to this gas station in the dead of night in an abandoned town. It was quiet. No one was around. Just me, the car, and a small floodlight. An eerie feeling. It really does give off that vibe of a lost traveler. Hotel California, getting lost in a town you shouldn't be in kind of mood. I love it. My favorite part of Resident Evil 2 is the beginning of the game, at the gas station, where Leon or Jill are traveling with their own intentions and come across a lone gas station where nothing seems quite right. Love that feeling, and here it is, in Pacific Drive. Hell yeah. Where the unfortunate aspects of Pacific Drive occur is once you actually start to get deeper into the game. To not beat around the metaphorical bush, Pacific Drive is very easy, and it is very repetitive. Outside of a few set-piece moments and some particular story moments, this game has one momentary gameplay loop for any moment you play the game. You start in the garage, where you work on the car, whether it be upgrading or repairing. Then, you plan a route. Each route is marked by certain milestones where you must visit to loot upgrade materials. During this looting minus shooting, you must collect energy orbs, or whatever they're called, which allow you to leave said zone from a particular point once you have collected enough to fill a small bar denoted in the small meter above the in-car map. When you, the player, are ready to leave, you access your map and select a point to escape from. It is then, at that moment, you must drive fast to escape this zone as it effectively collapses, like in the Fortnites the kids play. You then return to the garage, where you can use the orb energy to get special upgrades, which allow you to upgrade your car or repair it better. Then you select another route. Rinse and repeat for 25 to 40 hours. On a fundamental level, I have no issue with repetitive game loops. If the game is fun, then that must mean the gameplay loop is fun. Certainly, I enjoy driving cars in games, and there is a significant amount of time spent driving in this game. Sometimes on the road, sometimes off-road. This is just like me in GTA 5 Online, cruising about, except with more purpose, instead of attempting to raise my kill-death ratio. In the early hours, the exploration factor is spectacular. So many creatures to see, places to visit. The player's early car upgrades come quick, and yet at the same time, the wagon is exceptionally fragile. When it comes to fail states, should one actually fail, the game takes the Soulsborne approach. The player loses most of their loot from the drive, and the car is exceptionally damaged. But should one make it back to the spot their vehicle was wrecked, all their loot can be reclaimed. Tantalizing. The earlier hours of this game have a steep learning curve. Later on, it flattens out, much like the sense of difference in the terrain. For example, there are only maybe 6 or 7 different buildings in this game, period. None of this is helped by how the terrain was developed for the title. Pacific Drive is a procedurally generated game, sort of. The non-story missions almost always have a randomly generated map with randomly generated loot with randomly generated building locations. Such a game design does mean that every playthrough is different, but not really too different. Despite the best efforts of Ironwood Studios, the developers, it is rather hard to shake the feeling that there are only 3 unique locations in this game. The Easy Baby Zone that looks like the normal Oregon state, a swampland style of map that I can imagine is what people in the 1950s thought Mars looked like, and the final, hardcore zone that brings to mind visions of what maybe Washington State's high desert looks like, but with brutalist alien architecture. A quick 5-minute tour of any of these locations gives the overall gist of what visuals one is to see in this game. Are they pretty visuals? Yes. I quite enjoyed taking a drive through them, just enough to fill my lo-fi driving adventure checklist. but there is still only a certain amount of times I can handle a random barrel drum being placed conveniently in the middle of the road, before it starts to feel unnatural and grating. Now, this is where a kind game reviewer would say something like, well, for an indie game, this level of environmental detail and breadth of content is quite impressive. That is true. I cannot forget to mention that Pacific Drive is an indie game. It is not big budget, it is small budget, working on a niche genre of a game that hasn't really existed outside of maybe the guy who created its head and mind. But at the end of the day, this game has repetitive environments, and it starts to degrade my sense of adventure. I said my favorite moment in this game is when I pulled up to this gas station in an eerie environment. Well, would you know it, I saw this exact same gas station maybe half a dozen or more times throughout my playthrough, and the sensation I got the first time started to dwindle slightly by the fifth time I visited Big Dan's to fill up. It would be crass of me to claim that all the environments are the same, though. Should one follow the plot along the map, there are moments when one sees some pretty crazy set pieces that exist in environments that are not randomly generated. Take, for example, this early moment in the game where you must travel to the town of Sierra to solve some incomprehensible scientific factoid. You are just told that there is an anomaly you need to see there, anomalies being the in-game enemies generated by the zone. Well, when you get to this town, this anomaly is just floating, a celestial orb, levitating a destroyed bridge amongst strain cars. Spectacular looking, a groovy science fiction moment, epic shit. What could this anomaly be doing? What does it mean? Emotions similar to a movie character were experienced, eyes wide open, quickly placing the car into park and stepping out just to take a look beyond the cracked glass. A science fiction road trip in a wagon where you see cool shit. This is yet another thing I was looking for. It's unfortunate, then, that moments like these are few and far between. But when they do occur, it really does get my creative juices flowing, as they say. It makes me want to see what Ironwood Studios could make if they had the money to create more cool science fiction set pieces for me to travel around, instead of procedurally generated woods. There are moments when the environment is worth sticking around in, particularly when it's rainy and I'm speeding around, avoiding anomalies as my windshield wipers can barely keep up. Or maybe cruising along on an eerie night where you actually 100% need headlights or you can't see shit. Yet most of the time, I just want to drive on by it in the wagon without a passing thought. With, of course, the vehicle in question being another reason I stuck around to this game to the very end. The true main character of Pacific Drive is not you, nor is it the auxiliary cast of characters. No, it is the wagon. Having no particular model name, although being manufactured by the in-game company Radius Motors, this wagon is actually the vehicle, figuratively and literally what got me into this game. The entire gameplay loop revolves around caring for this little guy, and I love it. I do not name my cars, ever, but this digital wagon had me getting very close to doing so. Pacific Drive has the entirety of the gameplay loop revolving around upgrading the wagon. There is seldom an upgrade for the garage and player upgrades, but the bulk, the massed amount of time spent in Pacific Drive is thinking about how to upgrade the wagon. It starts off barely holding itself together, a rust bucket in shambles, but by the end of the game, what you have on your hands is a really cool-looking B-movie hero vehicle, decked out with a vast array of science fiction gizmos. The wagon is your lifeblood. It protects the player from radiation. It carries the loot collected and transports you in and out of the zone. Some may scoff at there being a wagon instead of maybe a truck or sedan, but a road trip in a big wood-paneled American station wagon is a uniquely American aesthetic. Images of a big American wagon often bring to mind traveling along the desert, just like the Griswolds going on a road trip to visit Wally World. I myself own a big wagon, a 1996 Buick Roadmaster Estate. It's rotten in more places than one, gets low teens fuel economy, and occupies the same road space as Texas. Yet, I will say, it is the best car I've ever owned, simply for the opportunity and sense of adventure owning a vehicle like this gives the driver. Glancing out upon an acres-long hood covering a ginormous V8, and beyond the small hood ornament lies nothing but the road ahead and the many things you can see. I will probably never go on a big road trip with my wagon, particularly because I don't trust it to go longer than 20 miles without overheating or leaking. But here, in Pacific Drive, I can maybe get a feel for what it must be like to drive my big wagon in a place other than the overdeveloped suburban hell known as Delaware. It seems Ironwood Studios founder Alex Draycott had the same sentiment, for as stated in a Game Developer Magazine interview, his inspiration for the game was by taking trips through the Oregon-Washington state area in a beat-up station wagon, as well as owning one himself. Finally, I can relate to a game dev not just by words, but by experience. What's more, I'm big on aesthetics, particularly for my in-game cars, so I was initially worried, or maybe concerned, that the desire to survive worse and worse environments in the game would force me to design the wagon in such a way that would make it look ugly. Fortunately, Pacific Drive is easy enough by the mid to late game that I was just skipping the high-level upgrades just to keep a certain aesthetic to the wagon. I wanted to see the wood panels on the doors, so I was rocking the basic steel doors just to see them, and for the most part, I kept it like that, because most of Pacific Drive is a non-threat. There are many unique-looking upgrades to this game, but for the most part, there were very little reason to get them. By the mid-game, when I could take more than one hit by an anomaly and unlocked the all-important off-road tires, I never really felt like any of the said anomalies were a threat. While they all certainly looked cool, the secret to defeating almost every mysterious anomaly is to just drive around them. None of them will chase you, aside from maybe one or two. Off-road driving is where you may be forced to interact with these creatures more often, but for the most part, these enemies can become a non-threat by just watching the road. Now, considering how many people I've seen drive abhorrently in GTA 5 videos, maybe this is a tall order for some, but at least for me, I had very little difficulty just blasting along the road and dodging the ghouls as I see fit. Such a shame, really, as one aspect to the enemy design I give the developers big props for is that none of the enemies devolve into standard survival game combat encounters. None will shoot you with hit-scan weapons. None will cause you to engage in a fight. Pacific Drive is an adventure driving game, so most, if not all, enemies are designed to be a threat more to the vehicle driving, not the player character. Many games will just result to violence as the main gameplay mechanic, so to have a game where your goal is to avoid by skillful driving, instead of just running and hiding in a closet, is yet another game design aspect that is a metaphorical breath of fresh air. Of course, I wish there was much more done with this idea. Maybe have more mobs that chase the vehicle. Have there be a randomly occurring nemesis enemy type truck, so we could live out the movie Duel perpetually. The coolest part of having a vehicle-based driving game is to have vehicle chases, where there is a lack of this in the game. I may harp on the easiness of this game, but I normally play games for some sort of challenge, whether it be a mechanical challenge, such as in Dark Souls, or a literary or ideological challenge, such as in Spec Ops: The Line. Pacific Drive is not really any of those things. The gameplay is just kind of easy if you are familiar with driving games, and the plot is just barely there. Gameplay-wise, the easiness almost seems like it's part of the design. In a pre-release interview with PC Gamer, the game's director, Seth Rosen, said that Pacific Drive was a game for people who don't like survival games. Yet again, the game's core concept almost feels like it was designed specifically for me. I hate everything about survival games, especially the tedium of the grind and inventory management. The game simplifies these things by doing most of the inventory management for me. Every object in the car, on the character, or in the garage is considered one big box. This makes crafting very easy, and I'm all here for it, as the UI in the garage is one of the few menus in Vidya history that made me audibly say, "Holy shit," when I first saw it. Just a mass amoeba of text and images, and although I eventually warmed up to it, I'm still rather thankful I did not have to interact with it any more than I needed to. Conversely, when driving, there is very little HUD. The player's health and mission objectives sit at the top, but otherwise all information is displayed through the gauges and toggles inside of the car. Not really a diegetic HUD, it's just a normal car dash. But nonetheless, the level of simulation in having to manually pull up the map and look at the gauges to determine fuel level and battery voltage is an excellent touch. Real classic road trip style. What is an even better touch is the quirk system, which is a rather splendid way to gamify moments when a car has an unusual issue that you just can't figure out. To layman termsify how this system works, the car will at times gain small little issues, such as a horn blowing when the door closes, the lights dimming when the wheels are cracked to either side, small things, annoying things, the quirks of owning a classic car. Most quirks are annoying in a mild sense, and can be solved via the little in-game DOS-looking computer that challenges you to find the issue with your car with guesswork. Some quirks, however, are actually quite beneficial. A quirk I never removed from my wagon is how any time I toggled the wipers off, the car would gain a flat speed boost, even from a standstill. So I never needed to upgrade my engine. I would just spam the windshield wipers on and off and launch myself to 70 miles per hour all of the time, much faster than the base engine could ever go. The quirk system by design is a rather charming way to mimic chasing down electrical gremlins in a real car, which my Buick has none, but my Saab has many. For example, the defroster turns off the radio. With every instance of this game showing the signs of an indie game-like budget, I am equally met with something that contains great attention to detail and sincere love that can only rise from something created by an independent developer. Pros and cons of being the first something. The effort that went into both of the large and small details of the car, the vibe of being a lone traveler, the seldom set pieces showing me things I haven't yet seen before, all unfortunately dragged down by the repetition of its otherwise beautiful environment and the sparse nature of the story. As I've stated at the top of this video, this game is the closest to my ideal game that any one title has ever achieved. A story-based driving game with a big emphasis on vibe and storytelling. Certainly, this game has a vibe, so long as you don't look at its buildings for too long. There is certainly a driving adventure, but all adventures inevitably come to an end, and when Pacific Drive finally wraps up, that is where I feel the most sour. Throughout the entire playtime of 27 hours of me looping through different environments to grind for materials, my main drive in this Pacific of a game was to see what was in the big corner of the map, the deep zone, where all the answers for why this mysterious parallel world exists. That would be revealed there, as well as a way to escape. Well, when you do arrive at this mysterious location called the Well, its visual splendor is once again exactly what I wanted to see. What is this place? What could be located within it? Well, upon driving into it, I don't know. The player walks through a hallway of TVs where previously dead characters are speaking again, and then you just drive very fast out and leave. And then you end up back in the garage, where all the characters say that they learned what they wanted to learn and basically just leave you there to continue to explore the zone. What the fuck? I never wanted to be in the zone. I got stuck into this place by magically divine intervention, and in the end, I am left with just a hopeful statement of, well, maybe you can find more stories in the zone by being here. I wanted to leave, end the adventure, not stay. People will often say that gameplay matters before story. Well, that might be a true statement, as a video game has the term game in it for a reason. Yet, I hate when the story that is barely there to begin with suddenly curtails me, making me feel like I just spent the last 27 hours just to waste my time. I have not felt this burned since the ending of Mad Max, where Max just destroys the car you spent the whole game building in a half-assed attempt to kill the non-present villain. Pacific Drive does not surpass that, but it got pretty close. For a game made by a team of people who hate survival games, this ending is the most survival game-ass ending I've ever seen, because it's designed for you to just keep playing. Very few answers to the questions I had were answered, and I had very few questions to start with, as this plot is thin, but just interesting enough to keep me going, if just to see cool shit. There are audio logs and journals to find, but it was rather difficult to parse through them to find something that was actually worth a read instead of just perpetual flavor text that swarms your vision. You can find audio logs for lore in the environment, but they are all randomly generated and there is no telling that you will find them all. My main source of story are the characters, which, while charming, do not speak often and will often speak while you are in some breakneck race to exit a zone just before you die, and thus you cannot hear all the dialogue. I was invested in the world because Pacific Drive was showing me things I had not seen in a game before, with a gameplay loop that I had always dreamed of. But when it came to trying them together into an excellent science fiction story, this is where the game fumbled hard. Despite my plot-based grievances, issues with environmental repetition, and the ability just to cheese the fuck out of the game by driving with both eyes open, I must say I want more of Pacific Drive. Gleaming through the concept art in the physical version of the game, you can tell that the developers had big ideas on their noggin. Surreal suburban landscapes, radiation-infected cities, and secret underground bases. In the set-piece environments of this game, you see the direction they wanted to go. But being an indie game with a basically untested subgenre, they had to constrain those ideas to create a finished product, which exists in the random generated environments that are all the same. In a sense, that is admirable. Many indie games have expansive scopes that never get realized, resulting in unfinished products and broken dreams. Ironwood Studios rather clearly knew what they were capable of as a studio and reined in those ideas before they ruined the project. The bones of what was done here is spectacular. The fundamental idea of slowly upgrading a car to explore uncharted and threatening terrain is wonderful, and on a mechanical level is done exactly how I would have dreamed of it, and how it should have been done. But how those mechanics interact with the actual world is lacking. Of course, I may be too negative there. Pacific Drive, for a new indie game, sold very well. It has almost 10,000 unique reviews on Steam alone, and most of them hover around a mostly positive to very positive consensus. I'm glad to see a new idea take shape, especially done well. Even more so because it means my crazy game idea I had in my head since I was 9 is not so crazy. It was great. Of course, all it took was a whole team of people who actually had the skill beyond just ideas to place it into reality. In the many mixed emotions I take away from Pacific Drive, the one that always rises to the top is that I want more, but not from this exact game. This game, more or less, laid the groundwork for maybe a new type of genre, one that I, and hopefully many other people, would genuinely enjoy. I want to see the concept art of Pacific Drive be realized, a grander adventure, with more things to be seen that have not been previously seen. A Pacific Drive 2, or whatever it shall be called, will hopefully be made and should exist. I will certainly be the first in line to order it, or at least the physical version. I waited 1 month to play this from release, just because the physical version took that long to come out. Was it worth it? Maybe not so much for the game itself, but for the energy that surrounds it, its success in the critical space. I'm certainly excited to see what comes next from this idea. And maybe next time, there will be dinosaurs and a Jeep with a winch.